Welcome to the Probate Realtor Show, your one source for selling and buying real estate through trust and probate. Hear directly from the best attorneys and trusted advisors on how executors and administrators navigate the probate process in and out of court. Being a personal representative or successor trustee can be a daunting task, and often beneficiaries don't have a clear plan. Let us help you make the right decision for your clients, your family, and your legacy. And now, here's your host, the probate realtor himself, Matias Baker Masucci.
Welcome, everybody, to another very exciting episode of our show. Today, we have a very special guest. He's not only a wise beyond his years, but he's also such a pleasant person to be around. Jeff Kravitz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here, and happy holidays to everybody.
Yes, of course. Jeff is a mediator and arbitrator, and he makes peace out of warring parties. And we are going to find out what that means. But let me tell you a little bit about Jeff first. After decades of experience litigating cases, people come to him to act as a neutral third party and work with them to solve their disputes. I mean, think about that. Somebody that you can go to and be like, oh my God, we're fighting. I wish we all had that in our cabinets in the kitchen in case something happens at home. Just open the door, somebody jumps out and mediates your conflicts, but we're not that lucky. So just like me, he finds creative solutions to resolve matters. And I think that is very important. So Jeff, without further ado, the first thing I want to do is you are the first mediator and arbitrator we've had on this show. So I first want to tell our audience, what is arbitration? What is mediation? Help me out understand that.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. And there is a difference between the two. A mediator is very much akin to a counselor or a therapist. It is a neutral, somebody who does not have a stake in the quarrel. And he or she sits down with people, or these days sits on Zoom with people, and chats with them in a creative way to try to get resolution to a problem. And when I say a problem, it does not have to be a lawsuit. Some of the more interesting things that I have mediated have been situations before people went to a lawsuit. So people will say to me, what is mediation? And my response, it is 1/3 therapy, 1/3 law, and 1/3 magic. And people will say, what is your trick? And I will say, it is not a trick. It is like the football player who audibilizes on the line and doesn't know quite what the play is going to be until the transaction gets started. So let's put that in one bucket. That's what mediation is. All right. Let's turn to arbitration. And arbitration is where I sit as a judge. I won't be wearing robes. I may not be wearing a tie as I am today, but I am the person who makes the decision when the parties come to me. Now, you would be saying, why is it that somebody would come to a private arbitrator rather than going to the court system, which is free? And the reason to that is not everybody wants to have their stuff on the street. There are people who have private quarrels, particularly in the entertainment industry, or frankly, in the real estate industry, and they don't need those things to be paraded out in public. The most recent example where they should have gone to a private arbitrator was, of course, the Johnny Depp case. Did either side come out looking better than before the litigation? I don't think so. But that's the distinction between mediation and arbitration.
Very nice. Thank you for explaining that. I have so many questions. It's crazy. Let me talk first about a lot of contracts that I'm familiar with have mediation built in. So it's mandatory. You have to mediate. You have to arbitrate. How does that work? Why is that a thing? Why do you have, before you can file a lawsuit, you have to mediate?
Well, there's more than one answer to that. Okay, if you want to be cynical, you could say it is because established interests such as real estate companies or banks or insurance companies, again, they don't want they don't want public situations. So they will, in fact, demand a mediation or an arbitration before a lawsuit can be filed. But
Okay.
think about it from the other way. One of the reasons that people go to mediation or to arbitration is because they want finality and
Okay.
they want things to be done more rapidly than the court system can accommodate. The court system, if you go to Los Angeles Superior Court, it can be as much as 5 years before your case goes to trial. Who
Wow.
wants to wait 5 years to resolve a problem? Very
Right.
few people. So the thought is that both mediation and arbitration serve the interests of the established powers, but also John or Jane Q. Public.
Got it. So everybody talks about the fact that the courts are overburdened. We hear that the courts are overburdened. So in connection with that question, I want to ask you about the binding effect of either one of these alternative methods of conflict resolution. My question is, are they binding? Do I have to live up to them? And when are they binding and when are they not binding?
All right, so let's take it one by one.
Mm-hmm.
When I am a mediator, it is not binding. I bring my suasion, my good wishes, my years of experience, and as a counselor to the situation, but I'm very quick to tell the people it is your case, it is your problem, and we are here to resolve things such that you are relatively comfortable with the situation, but I will not force you into a settlement. Now, let's contrast that with an arbitrator. I am, in fact, the judge, which means when I make my decision, unless it is influenced by corruption, a bribe, it is binding. And if the side that loses does not abide by it, the other party can go to court and force a judge to enforce the situation. So that's the contrast. Mediation is about suasion and influence. Arbitration is about being a judge.
Very nice. One more question related to this. When a judge makes a decision, there is an automatic right to appeal, at least for the first. Is that the same for arbitration? If I am not happy with your decision, can I appeal it through the courts?
That's a great question. And some arbitration agreements provide for a right of appeal. Most do not. And again, think about the pleasure of finality is what I call it.
Yes.
Which is going into the arbitration, neither side knows what I'm going to do. Frankly, I don't know what I'm going to do until I hear the evidence. But once I make that decision, 9 times out of 10, that's the end of the situation.
So I actually, this is pretty wonderful. The fact that there is a way, as you said, things can get lost through the courts, 5 years to go to trial. In fact, I believe that 1% of lawsuits end up going to trial. The other ones, end up getting resolved with force. Something like the percentage is really low either way. I believe, obviously, finality seems to be something very attractive that the parties would want. They would say, look, I have a good case, et cetera, et cetera. In the chain of events, can somebody take advantage of both? Meaning that let's first try mediation, and if that doesn't work, we'll do arbitration. Is that something that you see in your experience?
It happens. It's not the most common thing that you see.
Okay.
And there are situations where the mediator can later serve as an arbitrator. But frankly, I don't favor that because people are not going to be vulnerable and reveal themselves to me when I am the mediator, if in fact they know that I'm going to be the judge later on. And I'll tell people that because people have asked me to serve as both. And I've said, you know what? It's going to be a lot better for you if I'm simply the mediator in these circumstances.
That makes sense. Now, what are your, for lack of a better term, what's your journey to having decided, because obviously, as I introduced you, you were a litigator. What made you decide to go into mediation and arbitration? Was there a specific event that you can recall where you were like, okay, I'm done litigating, I gotta move on? Or were you like, you know what? I always knew that this was going to be another chapter of my professional career?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
And the answer is basically, I always had it in the back of my mind to be a mediator. And
Hmm.
why is that? Because throughout my personal and professional life, I'm always the person that people have come
Okay.
to play Solomon. Okay. And it's everything from relatives with girlfriend problems to me with roommate problems to my granddaughter who had to learn to accept the fact that her baby brother ain't going away. He's going to be there for a long time. So
Yeah.
I have mediated all sorts of circumstances, including being the go-to person at my law firm
Mhm.
when something cropped up that other people didn't want to handle.
Very nice. Now, let me ask you, because of this trait in your personality, did you ever entertain the idea of becoming a judge?
I did.
Okay.
And the answer to that is that being a mediator or an arbitrator is a very, very dynamic situation.
Hmm.
It's much more akin to what you and I are doing than
Right.
it is to, say, a movie portrayal of a judge. And the
Yes.
reason is that the judge, he or she may be sitting on high, but they're sitting there for 8 hours a day.
Right.
You and I both are much more, frankly, dynamic than that. And
Absolutely.
I much prefer to be a mediator and an arbitrator to being a judge. And frankly, it gives me more control over my life. I am free, much as the parties are free to say, no, we don't want Kravitz to be my mediator. I'm free to say to the parties, I think you got to go elsewhere. When
Ah,
you're with a
yes.
judge, everything that shows up at your bench, you got to handle. So you could be
Right.
dealing with the most difficult people. And as the public servant, you have to take it on. And frankly, at this stage of the game, that's not where I'm coming from.
That makes total sense. All right, let's get to the meat of it. This is the interesting part. I mean, obviously, this show is watched a lot by people who, are families who have family disputes. And if we know there's a cauldron for conflict to arise, family is definitely a place to be. So let's talk about some stories. Tell me, I know, we'll deal with different categories, but I wanted to know, do you have a story for us of families or former families who you mediated and arbitrated that you can share with us?
Sure. And this was one of my more difficult mediations.
Okay.
And frankly, I am fond of saying that it's not always about money.
Hmm.
You think it's about money, but there's always an idea behind the money.
Right.
Okay. And this one involved a woman who was the daughter of a very well-known country and western singer. I
Okay.
cannot tell you his name or her name,
All
but
right.
trust me, it is a name that you would know. And she was upset because on IMBD, the online listing of people in the entertainment business,
Uh-huh.
they listed her as the adoptive daughter of the country and western singer.
Mm.
So she came to me and she was very upset. She had a very close relationship with her father.
Okay.
And look, nobody asks where they're going to be birthed. The answer is where we go. And she
Hmm.
had had the delightful experience of being the daughter of the country and western singer. And yet IMBD put that little footnote on that she was an adoptive daughter. So I called IMBD, and frankly, these days, just getting hold of a human being is a major league accomplishment. And
Yes.
when the person answered, I started out with my mediator's hat, and I said, my client wants to sue you, but frankly, I don't have that good a case. I could sue you for defamation. I could sue you for this. I could sue you for that. But we're not coming at it from that way of looking at the situation. Look, she is a very nice person. She is lucky enough to have this wonderful dad. And as one human being to another, we're just asking for you to remove that moniker on her profile. So the woman cleared her throat and said, well, you don't have that good a case, but let me go to my supervisor and see what we can do. And what happened was lo and behold, 3 days later, the expression adoptive daughter was taken off. And
Very nice.
Matias, why was it taken off? It was taken off because I didn't approach the situation like a typical lawyer, yelling and screaming and pounding the table and saying I was going to sue their tushy off. I approached it as one human being to another, and that's the magic of mediation.
That's very nice. That's very nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. Okay, let's go into what we do, you and I. They call it, the meeting of the minds when you have a contract, right? The meeting of the minds happens when two parties agree on the terms. So that's kind of like your goal, to make it there. Now, I am assuming that some of the things you've mediated are very complex. And my question to you is, do you need to be an expert in all sorts of things, or you end up doing like the research? Like, if you never practice, you practice entertainment law, right?
Entertainment law, insurance law, business disputes. Those were the hearts of the matters
Okay. So do you only mediate cases that fall within that parameter, or do you mediate cases that, like you feel that you can help with? What do you think is the...
Sure. And I have one ironclad rule. The only type of mediation that I will not handle is a family law mediation.
Okay.
And the reason is to be an effective third-party neutral, you have to kind of stand above the fray. And Matias, I've been married for 43 years. Her parents were married for over 50 years. My parents were married for over 50 years. And to sit there in what is usually a tragic situation where a loving relationship at the beginning has now become something where the parties can't stand each other, that's something that I don't want to have any part of. But short of that, I can be an effective mediator in all sorts of disputes. One of the wonderful things of growing older is you have seen all sorts of disputes. And the more important thing is I bring my thinking cap and my empathy to every single situation.
Very nice. That makes total sense. All right, let's talk about some of the cases that come across your desk. So what type of cases are the most common that you've been dealing with recently?
Most common, this being the holiday season, was one that actually was kind of in your world. It was a commercial landlord and a commercial tenant. And again, while I cannot name names, the landlord was an extremely wealthy guy with lots of properties around Los Angeles, and the tenant owned an art gallery. Each one of these people, and they were nice people, came from overseas originally. And they were fighting over rent, which was substantial, largely because COVID interrupted everything and the gallery owner meant well, but wasn't able to come up with the rent. So he ended up getting sued. So we're basically, again, we're fighting over the rent. But as I mentioned before, there's always the issue behind the issue. And keep in mind, these guys were from two different cultures. So it was in person. I go into one room. I look at the person and I said, look, this is a commercial dispute. Thankfully, nobody's child died. Why can't we resolve things? He looks at me and says, I come from a very macho culture.
Okay.
I go into the other room. I look at the guy and I said, look, we're only talking about money. Why can't we resolve this? And honest to God, he says, because I come from a very macho culture. So I put the two of them together in the room and I said, look, it's the holiday season, and I appreciate the two of you guys are very macho. But do you think that your wives are going to want to hear about how masculine you are over the Christmas dinner? No, they're going to want to hear that this dispute has been resolved. It's settled. And it only settled because there were things beyond the money that had to be resolved before we could get to endgame.
Very nice. Very nice. And how did that go? Well?
It went well. They walked out happy people.
Very nice. So that's
not everyone ends up with happy people, but they usually end up as satisfied people with something that they can live with for the rest of their lives.
That makes sense. Let's talk about the philosophy a little bit here. What do you think is the secret to diffuse conflict? Like when things are, sometimes in my career, when I receive a message that it's frantic, I used to have a tendency to respond to the frantic. Sometimes I fall into it. But in reality, sometimes you need to let people cool off. Do you find that to be the case in your profession as well?
Absolutely. And I have several go-to strategies.
Let's hear them.
First of them are what I mentioned a few moments ago, which is to say, hey, look, I appreciate that you folks are very invested in your situation, but I got to tell you, we're dealing with a commercial transaction. We're not dealing with somebody who lost a child.
Right.
And I have dealt with those situations as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Matias, at that point, there's usually an audible, a diffusion of the tension that's
Right.
in the room, because they realize that while the stakes may be high financially, they're not dealing with something as tragic as a wrongful death.
Right.
The other thing is humor works wonders. And I was involved in a lawsuit where it involved huge entertainment stakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I am about 5'8" on a good day. My partner that I was working with was 5'4". And the opposition is shouting at us and saying, as to your lawyers, I have seen bigger and I have seen better. So my client cleared his throat and said, maybe bigger, but not better.
There you go.
At that point, the tension in the room dissolved in laughter. So those are just two of my bag of tricks to try to calm the waters. And I'm sure that you do something akin to those as well.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I wanted to, one of the things you mentioned in your previous story is the fact that people come from different cultures. And that is something we really have to be aware of in Los Angeles, where we practice is, we are in a melting pot, and people with different cultures have different cues, react differently, have different postures, different way of communicating. And I think that is something that you always have to keep in mind when people are transacting, when they're doing something where conflict can arise. And that's been, in my experience, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to share a story with you. Okay, so very contentious real estate transaction on one of the parties throughout the entire transactions. Because some people, they were the builders, and they were a family that had built this house, and they were very proud of the work that they did. The people who buy, obviously, when you buy real estate, you try to pick everything apart. So they say this lock doesn't work, this other thing doesn't work, and then and these people were starting to get upset, and it's like these floors are not as good as they should be, and all of this. So in the end, we make it to the end, and there is a part of the contract that says now it's the final verification of property condition, meaning that the buyer has to go in just to verify that the repairs have been made, that the things have been taken care of. Lo and behold, the seller says, these people are never setting foot in our house until they get the keys from escrow being closed. I don't care what anybody says, they're never coming in the house. And I'm thinking, okay, we got to close this transaction. The seller is never going to let them in the house. It's never going to let them in the house. So I'm thinking to myself, I need to find a solution for this. So I'm thinking, I call the agent on the other side, and I said, I have an idea. And I tell the agent my idea, and she says, let's try it. So I went to the house with my children, with my two oldest kids. And I took a video of them trying the doors, opening flushing the toilets, running the shower, all the things that needed to be repaired. And I took this whole video, elaborate, and I explained it, and I sent it to the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent showed it to the client, and the client said, we are good to close. And
Wow.
that is thinking outside the box.
That is a wonderful story, because, again, we're not talking about money, we're talking about feelings.
Exactly.
And it always comes down to feelings.
Yeah.
I had one, you mentioned cultural differences, and it took place in the Jewelry Mart, which is one of the things that is, rather unique to Los Angeles.
Right.
And I call it the case of the unstolen diamond. And the two people showed up. One was originally from China.
Mm-hmm.
The other was originally from the Russian Federation.
Okay.
And I said, I'm going to mediate your dispute, but not unless you show me the diamond first. So they pulled out the diamond, and Matias, it was a real stone that we're talking about.
Wow.
So they weren't fighting over scraps. And
Okay.
I said, so what's the problem? And the problem was that one of the sides thought that he had sold the diamond to the other person, and the other thought that it had been given over on contingency, and that the sale was not final until, in fact, he had sold the diamond. And I literally brought in translators who spoke their native languages. And what we came down to was that it was not a nasty dispute between bad people. It was a misunderstanding that was because of the differences in the languages that they spoke. Very interesting. And once we had gotten past that, we broke through the distrust that the two felt for each other. And not only did we resolve it, but one of the parties said, look, let me pay him an additional $500 because on reflection, I think it's my fault that I didn't understand what he was saying.
That's beautiful.
You sleep so well when you mediate a case to that kind of resolution.
Yes, yes. Let's touch upon something else as we are. I wanted to ask you a question about gray areas. He said, she said, we have contracts that we work with, but sometimes somebody, like I said, this is the case that what you talked about. Somebody said, he said that he was going to do this. He said that he was going to do that. How can mediation help? And I don't want to use the word enforce, but clarify these gray areas which often come up in during disputes.
Sure. And again, sometimes it comes down to a misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it comes down to the way human brains are wired, which is always to see crisis. And it goes back to when we were cave people.
There you go.
Okay. And one way that I try to break through that is I'll go into the room of one of the parties and say, look, I read all the materials that you gave to me. Very interesting. What do you think the other side is saying about you?
See, put the person in the other person's shoes. There you go.
Correct. And sometimes I get less than honest answers, but I at least get them thinking in that direction. And part of what that does in terms of our caveman brain is to maybe get them to break through and see that, in fact, we're not dealing with something in black and white, but something in shades of gray.
Beautiful. And this is a great note to end this episode. Jeff, I could talk with you forever, so I'm going to have you back for another episode. We're going to wrap it up right now. It's been a pleasure to chat. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Do come for the next episode that I'm going to have Jeff on, because we are going to go even in more depth about this ability to resolve disputes, which I think it's an amazing talent. Jeff, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I will see you in the next episode.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you again, Matias.
Thank you for listening to the Probate Realtor Show. Find more episodes and interact with us at probaterealtor.la. That's probaterealtor.la. Listen, ask questions, and get results. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The Probate Realtor Matias Baker Masucci is a licensed real estate broker in California, DRE number 020547763. Any legal information provided is for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing legal advice. Contact an attorney to obtain advice with respect to any particular legal issue or problem. We make no guarantees as to the accuracy of any information. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.